Hello, everybody. I would like to, can you hear me?
Okay, great.
Others, yeah? I would like to warmly welcome you, everyone who joined the panel entitled The Influence of Cultural Economy and Current Cultural Policies Towards Artists and Creators, and happy that organizers agreed at least twice for the topic of our panel. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, great.
Others, yeah? I would like to warmly welcome you, everyone who joined the panel entitled The Influence of Cultural Economy and Current Cultural Policies Towards Artists and Creators, and happy that organizers agreed at least twice for the topic of our panel. Hello, everyone. I think that we have problems, Emilia. Others, yeah? I would like to warmly welcome you, everyone who joined the panel entitled The Influence of Cultural Economy.
So sorry, can we all check if we don't have the online platform behind? Yes, because someone has the, and it's.
I have only one. I think that we have problems, Emilia. Is it only our problem or? Okay, so after warm welcome, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Dorota Ilczuk. I'm professor at SWPS. This is private university settled in Warsaw. The university where the Creative Economy Research Center is established, and I'm the head of this center. For the sake of this conference topic, it's quite important that I'm also the author of the Polish profile in the Compendium of Cultural Policies, Facts and Trends. Speaking about labor market, we should understand that it's a very cruel market for artists, and after many years of practicing, they are dealing with the situation when they work can be very low paid, sometimes not paid at all. It's very unstable. It's precarious, and in this situation, sometimes the issues which are so normally for the others, like the insurance, are becoming a luxury for the richest. But speaking from the point of view of economists, we have to say that this market, labor market of artists, is the aftermarket, which means that the demand on this market is very much related on the demand on the arts, goods and services at all. So in fact, it's very much related to the fact how much people would like to spend on culture, and also how much state and local governments would love to spend on the so-called collective consumption. Of course, speaking about this, I try immediately to catch this these two areas about which we are going to talk today: cultural economics and cultural policies. First, cultural policies can be seen in the labor market on the demand side, but also on the supply side. It is extremely important when we start to think about this labor market that state can make something for the sake of artists, not to allow this market be so cruel, and of course it should be free, but not wild. It means that some institutions and mechanisms, norms, are needed at this market. This is the core of our discussion. We are going to look like how those processes can be implemented, how those processes are at the moment possibly, because this is the case of Poland, for example, taking place. So we are going to answer the question, what's the role of cultural economics in building principles, in changing cultural policies at all, but also what's the new in cultural economics if we talk about how it can be used by people responsible for cultural policies, or possibly it is the role of cultural economists who should enlighten some questions and some issues for the people dealing responsible for cultural policies, what to do for the best of artists and creators, because they are the figure which is the most important in our today's discussion. I have a very distinguished panelists in my today panel. I would like to introduce them now. First, I would like to introduce Marilena Vecco, Professor of Entrepreneurship at Burgundy Business School, Dijon, France. Marilena, you are welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and we have Andy Pratt, Professor of Cultural Economy from the Department of Sociology, City University of London.
Hi there.
We have Karol Borowiecki, Professor from Department of Business and Economics, University of Southern Denmark.
Thank you, Dorota. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we have Emilia, Cholewicka, PhD student from University of Social Sciences and Humanities, and also professional and very active, believe me, ballerina dancer.
Hello, thank you.
And then we have Helmut Anheer, who not only established Handke School in Berlin, but also is teaching at California University, Los Angeles, and is visiting professor at London School of Economics. Helmut, you are welcome.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Dorota.
Thank you very much for taking my invitation. And I hope that in a way, after the keynote speeches, we can say that there is a gap in the research on labor. There is a gap in the research, or maybe not a gap, but not enough of works done by cultural economists on the labor market of artists aspects and specificities. So let's do something like possibly to produce another fantastic book after our panel. Let's treat it as the introduction to this. We all panelists had one preparatory meeting and decided to resign from already pre-recorded presentations and to use live formula. So I think that I'm referring to all listeners and viewers that you can accept it, and I hope it will be much more live. We will try to find answers to the questions I've already put during, but of course all your questions are very much welcome. And also you can find a question which is a sort of quiz. This quiz was prepared by Emilia, and Emilia, tell us what is it about, please.
Okay, thank you. I've just sent it on chat on a live platform. So according to the research that we've done, we would like to ask you, what is the multi-professional index for artists in Poland, actually? And this concerns only artistic occupation. So don't think about artists being a waitress and a dancer, but artists themselves in the artistic occupations. So the link is in the chat on the online platform, and if anyone would like to get engaged, just please do it. And all the informations are in the link. When you click on the link, everything is there. And also I'm here to help you out with any questions and problems.
Thank you, Emilia. I think it was very important for us to underline the role of this index, because this index really influences the size of the professional artists population in the countries. And it is extremely important not only for politicians, but it is just the number of voters, possible voters for them. So speaking about market and government failure theory, we can understand it very easily. This is a relatively small group, not very relevant for them, but also it is very important for assessing the costs of any possible schemes which are going to be introduced and dedicated to artists. Now, I think that we will go to the first our intervention, which is going to be the Polish case. I'm sorry to start with the Polish case, but it is so, I'm sorry to say it, but it is so illustrative speaking about the topic of this conference. We would like to show you how the research taken research was done on the labor market of artists, and then how it was implemented and what is it now. And we will try to do it with two people within 12 to 15 minutes. So let's start, Emilia, to show the presentation. Let's be quick. Okay, so this is the first slide, which is just the title, the influence of cultural economics on the current cultural policies towards artists and creators, prepared by us, in frankly speaking, prepared so nicely and pretty by Emilia. And then we can go to the second slide, which can show how it started. And in fact, what I can say, I'm not going to be very modest, but I must say that I didn't need the pandemia to say that something wrong was going with the cultural policies in Poland, and to make the observation that after 1989, the focus of the cultural policies was put on institutions and on the system of financing programs and projects. So in fact, artists, performers, creators became invisible in the whole system. We know that the daily work of creators, performers is very specific and very difficult, and the lack of artist support schemes really made the things worse. So in fact, it was very unexpected that the situations like mentioned here on the slide, that social insurance became the luxury for the richest. So there was a majority of freelancers without any sort of social insurance, not medical insurance, not the pension, nothing like this. So the situation finally led to artist protest. It was very unexpected. Nobody expected artists protesting, but it was protest against neoliberal government in fact, a day without art, supported by national cultural institutions, some of them. Some of them were local, situated in big cities, in metropolises, maybe, mainly, but it happened in 2012. Then I started to think that I don't know really what's the situation of economic and social situation of artists in Poland is. And I didn't know if it's only the tabloid news or we should in a way examine it in the deeper way. And then I started to run something which is on the second slide, on the in fact, it's third slide. So Emilia, could you put the third slide here? Ba-ba-ba-bam, you can see the timeline of the research which was done by my team and myself, starting from 2012 and finishing nowadays. We can see the results. So at the very beginning, we started just to monitor and analyze the situation, economic and social situation, but of artists and creators, but on a national scale. We didn't want to focus on metropolitan cities only. We wanted to focus on to use very representative data, and the study was long-lasting, 2 years, and it was very rich in findings. Finally, we found something like what's the specificity of this labor. It doesn't mean that if artist is not working, that he or she is lazy. It is linked with the specificity of the artistic work. We discovered something like the SOS sign sent by artists who were criticizing the lack of any supporting scheme prepared and introduced by the state and local authorities. So the first research was initiated by us. Of course, we had to prepare the application and to win the competition, but still it was initiated by us. But in 2017, it was a voice coming from the government, which asked us, because of the first research, to prepare something like the international perspective. How the what are the solutions? What is the experience coming from the other countries about the support schemes for artists? What about the status of artist idea, etc., etc.? We did it, and we also prepared something like the basis for the whole systemic solution for artists. We didn't want to focus only on the hottest issue, the issue of insurance, social insurance. We wanted to show that there are many different aspects, there are many different problems and many different possibilities. And the issue of artist status, professional artist status, shouldn't be just linked with those, with this, what happened, what is happening with insurance. Then it was the research which was done by us and very unique, and we are very proud of this, the most important in the whole set in 2018, estimating the number of artist creators. It looks quite stupid that we've decided to estimate the number, and we are proud of this, but really, believe me, there was nothing like a real information about the number of professional artists in Poland. And it was used by as an excuse by the previous ministers, saying that, oh, if we don't know even how many are working, the professional artists are working in Poland, so what we should think about any scheme, any possible solutions for them, we should just think that to be the artist is a state of mind, is something like a hobby. We shouldn't treat them as professionally working people. So it was the first in 2018, it was the first research we stopped this narratives where artists were regarded as crazy talented people trying to achieve their goals and achieve and to continue their career without any logical thinking about the social and economic aspects of doing this profession. We not only, frankly speaking, I don't know, sometimes Eurostat is giving the information about the number of artists in different countries, but sometimes I don't know where the informations are coming from. After the 2018, I know that they are coming from our research, but before it was for sure just the information about people working in cultural institutions, which is a fake information. This research was really very rich in outcome. It really allowed to assess how much the new system is going to cost, and then what's the real situation of artists, and it really helped to construct the new legislation. We are mentioning that we are also involved in the theater artists and the time of COVID-19 research because we like representative and qualitative research, and we would like to say that this last research was not so much linked with the new legislation, but was extremely important for us to be just on time and to be with artists in this harsh time. Emilia, could you show the next slide, please? And then before I will ask Emilia, who is an artist, and she should be the person explaining the new law and the problems with its implementations, to tell you about some findings which helped us to understand the logic and the issue and the many different aspects of the professional artists, creators, milieu in Poland. In fact, first of all, we had to fight the imaginary size versus actual size of the population. Everybody was expected us to give the number like 150 people, 1,000 people, 150,000 of people working as professional artists in Poland, and it was a fake news. In fact, we calculated that the average multi-professional index is like 2.55, which helps us to understand that if you look at this picture on the right, that what we are thinking about the professional artists, number of professional artists is much, much bigger than it is in reality, because I'm not thinking about them to be also waiters and babysitters and couriers, etc. But I'm thinking about artists being both actor, performing artists, artists, visual artists, the director, scenographer. So it is quite important for us because it not only shows the size of the group, but also it shows sometimes it was the reason for them how to survive the pandemic time, having not one by 2.55 occupations. So it was extremely interesting. Of course, we were very detailed in assessing the Gini, in assessing the social and economic situation. So that's why we are giving you here Gini index, which is 0.4425 for artists. In average for Poland is 0.298. It shows how big inequalities we suffer in the cultural industries compared to the other industries. And now I would like to ask Emilia, as a ballerina, professional ballerina, to take the floor and to continue with what happened with our findings coming from the research.
Thank you. Thank you for the voice as well. Well, as a dancer and a scholar, it's sometimes difficult because you feel like schizophrenic a bit. Well, I have to say that for many years, artists were neglected. And when I was still a student of a ballet school, of a state ballet school in Warsaw, just let me tell you this short story. I remember there was a Sleeping Beauty rehearsal, and I was sitting on stage, and the principal dancer was talking to another guy. It was 2006, and he was saying, well, what I should do, I don't know what to do, because I'm almost 40 and I should get my pension soon, but it's not possible because the government changed the law, and now I can go and retire when I'm 68. And how I supposed to dance for 58 years? Because for ballet dancers, we start the education, very hard education, when we are 10. So it took 12 years to start the conversation about the situation of artists in Poland. So as I said, the bill was very much awaited, and it's amazing how culture economics and the research get involved like fully during the whole process in creating culture policies. So as we said before, first of all, knowing the size of the knowing the number of artists allowed us to or allowed politicians to estimate the costs of the new act and find the system, which is very innovative as well, and we will talk about it later on, how to fund and finance the new act. But for me, as a dancer, what was very important was this democratic way of creating the bill, because I think that the needs of certain groups of artists were identified, which is so important that we don't see musicians in the same way as we see dancers. And for example, there is a part of the bill that tells us the way of getting benefits. And for example, if you work as an artist for 20 years, then you get the benefits and the status of artist or a card of artist forever. But for the dancers, 20 years is a long time. So because of the research, because of all the discussions that were along the process of creating the bill, we know that for dancers, it has to be shorter time, like 15 years, not the 20-year period. So that was very, very important. So now you can vividly see that the research that we've done, that all the discussions with the artists, and it's worth mentioning that, and maybe at bottom, the keynote speakers, well, we managed to get involved artists in this research, because we had almost 6,000 answers to our study, which is very, very important. And it's amazing because in Poland especially, artists are, not really keen on working with the politicians. So it was a big success. Also, because of the research, we finally found out what is the size of the gray economy and what is the scale of non-contractual work. And also we knew the data on the income of the survey group. So how many artists are living on the edge of poverty, so they need a big support from state. And it was not happening since the communistic time. And I think this burden that we're carrying, the communists that we went through, also involved the way of seeing the new legislation, which we will be talking about later on. So I said a few words about the act, and I wanted to tell you something more about the way of creating it. So it started in 2016 when there was a big state conferences with different sectors of culture. So there was a different meeting with dance, different meeting with music. And during the whole process, there were special bodies from different artistic groups discussing and giving feedback about the legislation. So apart from the research, there was a research done, representative research done, there were discussions with artists, and there were also people, lawyers and politicians working on the policy. So this quite interesting anecdote that I would like to tell you is the first name of the bill, which was status of artists. But because of our research, we found out that artists, they don't want to be called artists, and they don't want to have this this opportunity to get the status of artists. And it was interesting that we asked them, how do you feel like? And for instance, musicians said, well, we're not artists, we are performers. Maybe when we die, then they will call us artists, but don't call us artists, don't give us a status, because we're not artists. And on the other hand, ballet dancers said, yes, we are artists, because since we're 10, they're telling us, you go on stage, you have to show all the qualities and values of the Polish artist on stage. So ballet dancers, in 87% of them, they said, we are artists. So in the end, they gave up on calling the act on status of artist. And now we call the act on the rights of the professional artist, or the act on the benefits of professional artists, which is, again, democratic. And you can see that we're hearing, and they're hearing the voice of artists, which is just amazing. So as we said before, the act helps mostly artists who are on the edge of the poverty. So they cover the costs of the social insurances, which is so important. Like my friend had a situation that he broke his leg during rehearsal. He didn't have the social insurance because couldn't afford it. And then he has a big economical problem now, because he had to get a loan to pay for the hospital that he will be paying for the next 15 years. So this is something that this act cover. And there are special rates on contributions for social and health insurances. There are also special grants and special scholarships. And there are subsidies for insurance and premiums. But all the artists have to pay a bit, but majority of the costs of the act comes from something that is very, very, I would say, problematic, because the idea of funding this act was to get involved high-tech firms, which gave us a lot of problems. So I'm talking about the blank media tax, and this is another act in Poland that was created in 1996, but it wasn't uploaded since then. So people who make Xeroxes or blank CDs, they pay an extra fee, which is not a tax, it's a fee. And the idea was to get involved companies producing tablets, producing smartphones, producing computers to start paying for the blank medias. And this is the first problem that we would like to talk about when we talk about the new law.
Okay, so I think that we tried to show you what is going on now today in Poland, because in fact the bill is going to be voted in August. Possibly it's going to be voted, because after this hating, this time when artists stopped to be loved became hated, we really don't know what is going to happen in August, and what is the latest result of our long-lasting research. But still, I must say that there is a quite problematic this cooperation with politicians who are really, what to say, artists are always against politicians. I think that I was talking to Andy, and Andy said that artists were always against the governments. Yes, okay, they are always against, but still now it is a very very delicate issue in Poland. And then we can find something like the tensions between the young artists and the old artists, especially when we start to think about how this whole new system is going to work and how it's going to look like. For us, it was always a little bit awkward, because our university is very modern and neoliberal, and then to work together with this government, it was always quite also delicate issue. So what I must say that maybe it is fantastic to have great plans about cultural economics research, but it is thinking about implementation, the findings in the cultural policies. You have to be aware that this is like the half of the way when you finished your research. Something should happen now, and then you have to decide if you want to be involved or if you just don't care, because there are many of research studies I'm taking part where there are big expectations that politicians will take care about our findings, and we will try to interest them how fantastic we were in our new thinking. But sometimes it is really like nothing at the very end. So with this, I would like to finish our short. Was it short? Yes, we will try to fight for in future. So you can see my ballerina Emilia and myself still involved and still involved in the fighting with the people who are not really very much for the new future of artists, and not regarding artists as people who are not celebrities and just hardworking, talented, and sometimes sacrificing their personal life to the professional career. I would like now to, finishing this, I would like to ask now Marilena Vecco. Thank you very much, Emilia. It was great, really,
Thank
really. Thank you. I would like to ask Marilena, because we didn't mention, even if we took care about the gender gap issue and the situation of females in the on the professional market, if you can share with us your observations and your research on the gender gaps in the cultural and
Indeed,
creative
I want to
sector.
just to, thank you so much first of all for the presentation. I'm really delighted to be here with you. And as Dorota mentioned, I would like just to share with you some insights, some conclusions that we identify in this report that was commissioned to the European Commission by the European Commission in 2019. The title of this report that is downloadable on the website of Pantea and European Commission's site of cultural direction as well, is Gender Gaps in the Cultural and Creative Sectors. It has been developed with a research team based in the Netherlands within this Pantea, that is a network serving the European Commission. The objective of these studies was to provide a sort of comprehensive, as much as possible, overview on the status quo of women in the cultural and creative sectors in Europe. So in this study, we cover all the different cultural and creative industries, including, of course, visual arts. And then the idea was to identify what kind of gap women are presently facing. And the second objective was to identify the causes and drivers for these specific gaps. And in the study, you can find also second an appendix where there are different, good best practice have been identified as a sort of experience models that can be used and extended to the different sectors. As Dorothea mentioned, data on the cultural and creative industries, specifically for visual arts, are not very precise, they're not well collected, means that we don't have, I would say, standard share criteria to collect this data in the different states. So one of the issues we were confronted with was the heterogeneity and the fragmentation of and the diversity of this data. That means that if you want to know right now how many artists we have in Europe, in the different countries, it's impossible, because we have different criteria, different metrics, different ways how to account for the artist. So we decided to leave out the quantitative dimension because it was not possible. In the report, you can find different statistics that are very punctual, related to a specific context or to a specific situation. So we collected different information from experts. So we did a qualitative analysis, and what we can, one of the first conclusion is that we need really to have a more structured, better organized way to collect, and that's why at European level. I attended different meetings with the Eurostar experts in order also to change something about these statistics, because they do not reflect the reality of facts. Here you can see the gender gaps that we identify in different cultural and creative industries. So gender stereotypes, access to decision-making and leadership roles, access to resources and the gender pay gap, access to the arts labor market, and finally, sexual harassment. So these are, the elements that are reconducted to the concept of the gender gap in our specific studies. Here you can find different, information concerning the gender stereotypes across the different cultural and creative industries. So most of the time it's a question of leadership. So let's see, we know that in all sectors, cultural and creative sectors, women do not have, just a few women have leading and leadership positions. Then women, one of these stereotypes is that women are more muses instead of active creators. And then what another interesting aspect is that, and this is statistically based, that women perform better in education. They have a better educational trajectories, but at the end, when they have to be involved in high level positions, we don't recognize, I mean, the society doesn't recognize their background and their role. Concerning the second elements of the decisions-making leadership position, we know that women are less represented in the decisions-making and the leadership roles. But I would say that, of course, it depends on the cultural and creative sectors, because even in the cultural creative sectors, we can identify some sectors that are more conservative than others. But with the new generations, there is, so age in this case is an important factor. That means because we have in some sectors women that are taking more leadership and they have better positions. In terms of access to resource and equal pay issues, as you know, we can have a difference. This is affect not just in the cultural and creative industries, but in all industries, in the whole society. This gap is between 20 and 40%, and in the cultural and creative industry, sometimes a gap can be even increased to 50%. So I would say that is alarming. Then there is, we know that the cultural creative industries are characterized by specific features, for example, informal working, self-promotion, traveling and touring. And these features, I would say, act in a sort of barriers, because women who decide to be at the same time artists, but mothers, are experiencing some limitations. And that's why in some countries right now in Europe, we have some program of mentorships, and they're very useful because they explain women how to deal with, I would say, it is double function, double position. Is not just professional, but just also to mitigate and to do a sort of trade-off between private and personal life. Then the other aspect was the access to the labor and the art market. So women are discouraged in most of cultural and creative industries. There is a lack of access to this economic financial resources, but resources in terms of time, because if they are engaged with the family, they have less time to work, to promote themselves. And we observed that only in few states there is, there are some specific policies that are going in the direction to support women in developing their careers within cultural and creative industries. So the point is that even the research was 2019, but even 2021, being a mother could be very problematic if you want to develop to have a full enriching career. And then the final element that we identified was the sexual harassment. So there is, we know there are some sectors that are more competitive than others. So there is a high competition for work. Then there is also a problem related to industry culture. So sometimes we are a bit puzzled by the fact if is a woman leading the organizations, we imagine immediately that the leadership, the organization will have a not so good performance. So it's then we have gender power relations, and we have also sometimes it is underestimation of women. And what is interesting is that about sexual harassment, we identified and we called it is a sort of paradox, because when we thinking about cultural and creative industries, we in our mind we have the image, the pictures of a sort of very cool, very informal, accessible, egalitarist system, or I would say environment. But then in these sectors or these specific industries, we have some more hidden hierarchies and power relations. And we observe that these relations seems to be even stronger in cultural and creative industries than in other sectors, in other industries. So just to provide you some conclusions that you can find in our report, that some of these 5 drives that I shortly discussed sometimes are cross-sectorial and quite universal. So they are not just characterizing one cultural or creative industries, but I would say they are characterizing all cultural and creative industries. They are interrelated and interactive with other drivers. So it's really difficult to, I would say, to isolate, to separate one drive from another one. And then there is a lot of expectation and social models. So the point is that we need really to change the culture and the education, I would say, from the kindergarten and the creche and so on. And then to develop more, initiatives to provide the visibility of these gender gaps. And just to give you an idea of the recommendations we identify in terms of policies, because policies are the topic of this, is the frame of the topic we are discussing. The idea is really to give a balance of representation of men and women in organizations and in the different functions, then to facilitate and support women. So different initiatives could be developed in order to support women, to give more visibility to women, then to support parents, include childcare policies such as subsidies, and to develop some specific sectorial policies to allow, for example, traveling of women, and then have a better law in terms of maternity and childcare policies, because so far in Europe and all around the world, we do not have, I would say, a standard very friendly maternity leave. For example, in France is 3 months and a half. In Italy, it could be 4 months, or in Slovenia, it was 1 year completely paid. So you can understand that the system can have a different impact and can raise, or I would say mitigate, the gender gaps existing in all cultural and creative sectors. I would like to conclude this short presentation by a quote by Marie Curie. It's in French, but I think that this is really a good quote that can reflect, I would say, the stereotypes still characterizing not just the cultural and creative sectors, but all sectors of our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilena. It was very interesting. Thank you very much for the issue of maternity, which is very crucial for our Emilia, who is 7 months pregnant at the moment. And
congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. And she was dancing in the performance by Trelinsky last week. So she's really a hero. And I must say that this is really speaking about the gender gap. Sometimes we are forgetting the issue of maternity, where for example in Poland for freelancers is just out of question. There is nothing like any maternity benefits for somebody who is pregnant and who is
No, indeed. Yeah, because I think that most of you read the books by Rebecca Solnit, and one of the book is the mother of the questions, and she was discussing, saying that she was describing how she was trying all the time to escape from a question: why you decide not to have children? Because when in front of you, a journalist as a woman, of course, the first question is, why you don't have children? Yeah. And if you have children, the question is how having children have an impact on your career. But if we imagine this question is never posed to men. That means if we ask Karol, how did impact having children on his career? I mean, it's not, I would say, a familiar question, because if it's a man, such kind of questions are not raised. But if you are a woman, then we are double.
You're very much right. Exactly. Thank you very much for this, Marilena. I would like now to jump to Andy, because the concept of creative cities, my goodness, it's fantastic idea. We all love to live in creative city. Do you think that that artists also would love to live in creative city? Andy, please.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Yes, I'm going to talk about that, but I just thought I would share this advert with you, which was produced by the UK government about 6 months ago, which demonstrates the paucity of understanding of both the creative economy, what it and artists, and how they relate to the rest of the economy. So I think we have here an example of the suggestion that being a ballet dancer is not a proper profession, and that you should simply join the, in this case, it was the security services, because there are more jobs there. We heard, of course, from Emilia that it's a lifetime training to become a ballet dancer, and very few actually make it towards the performance stage. So this is insulting in so many ways, but of course, it demonstrates the lack of understanding that policymakers and governments have of the relationship between the creative economy and its activities. So I just wanted to make these overall points that are about the notion of the creative city, but I think quite strongly, I think we, to reinforce the points about the economy, is that I think traditionally the emphasis has been for the arts and the cultural activities is that the assumption that the intrinsic value of arts will symbolically be very large, but economically be very small. And therefore the instrumental impact will be much larger, and therefore the state should invest in these sorts of activities. And of course, as Dorota and Emilia have pointed out, and I think we've seen an increasing interest in recognizing that part of the reason is that there's just not the data out there. And as the point was made very strongly, is that politicians tend to think if the data's not there, it can't be very interesting, or it can't be very important. So I think there's an issue there about having this detailed knowledge, not just of who is in the artistic labour market, but the wider construction of the market itself and the market conditions. And obviously these issues about social support systems, etc., are critical, as well as the operation of artistic labour markets as well, and in a sense the wider industry that they relate to. So I think we have these massive overarching problems, which are about the need for evidence-based data, but we can't provide, or we are only just starting to provide, time series or extensive analysis. Invariably, they're too narrow historically. But, and this is my other overarching point, data is necessary, but it's not sufficient to make the point. This broader political economy of artistic production and consumption, which I think some of this evidence-based work is prompting us to think about a broader framework. Dorota mentioned earlier that, of course, there is this sort of institutional focus from governments that ignores the artists, and so it's one way or the other. It's an interconnection of those that we need to propagate an understanding of, which I'd refer to as the creative ecosystem. So I'm just going to make some points about a number of topics. I won't go into any detail of them, but I think this issue of the creative city and also creative economy more generally at the national level and the international level. Clearly, we've seen the growth of interest and support for this area. Although I think we have to question the nature of that support in a way, because unfortunately it relies upon the idea that it's exogenous development, foreign direct investment, flagship developments in cities, bringing things from elsewhere into cities that will bring the growth, not endogenous development. And it's endogenous development, which is what you can do for yourself, which is the intrinsic values that are already there, that what culture can do for itself and develop, that is often ignored. So rather insultingly, whilst people might love the accolade of a creative city, but in the strictly economic notion of the economic of the creative city, actually what you're celebrating is the fact that actually you failed at creativity and culture, and you have to import some from elsewhere. So that's an alternative interpretation that we ought to be careful of some of the dominant notions of the creative city. We lack information on what the creatives do, and I think this is part of the problem. We focus invariably on the secondary type of jobs that they do in the broader entertainment, service and restaurant industry, and we forget about the actual dependence on the core creative activities. So that's the environment, and within that environment, of course, we can talk about COVID in a moment, but cities have been overheating because of this focus on activities, and the overheating has led to the focus on financial services and this entertainment, the experience economy version of cities as a playground in some way. And what this means is, of course, classic economic effects of rising prices, property prices, etc., and the exclusion of lower paid and public service workers. And you can see this not just in the creative sector, but broadly, if you look in the health service or the fire service in London, then basically those workers, they're having to bus them in or bring them in by train from 30 and 50 miles away. They can't employ people locally because people can't afford to live locally, etc. So this issue of the success of cities is only for one group. And increasingly, you're forcing out the service workers, workers providing service, not the service sector, as it were. And the artists, of course, are the extreme case of this because they're very low paid and they're on precarious contracts, etc. They're often doing 2 or 3 jobs, etc. But the irony is that within the notion of the current regeneration of cities and the creative cities, artists are the what have been called the fire starter for the regeneration of economies. So the artists are needed there for many regeneration plans. Get the artists in there, make the area hip and trendy, get people back there, and then we will have redevelopment. Except they don't mention that actually that means kicking the artists out because they're no longer needed to play this role. Okay, so there is that factor, as well as all the others that we've just heard about. In the creative sector more generally, it might be represented as all cool and trendy, but it is plagued with being the most discriminatory sector, I think, going in terms of gender, class, ethnicity, and age discrimination. All of those indicators, the creative economy looks pretty bad. So I guess be careful what you wish for is one of the challenges, I guess, that those advocating the culture and creative economy. We're not denying that there's a case to be made for culture, but not in its current situation. culture needs to be a well-formed industry in broadest institutional economic sense, in that it needs a proper system of control and organization. It needs issues about labor support measures, social support measures, etc., etc. But at the moment, it is, as we would refer to it, a cottage industry. It's made up of small self-employed people and small agencies that do not have the capacity to provide those social security support measures. So this issue, I'm coming back to COVID now in the city, is that we've seen examples across many cities in Europe, particularly of the phenomenon of the shrinking city, whereby decline, Berlin was a case, in Leipzig, for example, of cities actually getting smaller, and therefore there being this surplus space, which let's open them to artists. Artists can come into our city, and we have a happy combination of cities being regenerated by artists moving back in that were shrinking. But when the shrinking cities stop shrinking and they start growing again, well, we know the inevitable impact. And this is exactly what's happening at the moment with COVID, because we now have many high streets and shops empty and offices empty at the moment, and people are saying, yes, we need to get people back in the city. We need to get cities going again. Let's open these spaces to artists, and they can occupy these spaces, bring the people back to enjoy cities again, and the whole system will start going again. But again, this is the vicious cycle of regeneration, whereby artists are instrumentalized, the so-called meanwhile economy. So meanwhile, whilst regeneration starts happening, we bring the artists in, and then they get kicked out later. So we need to pay more respect to artists. Artists have a right to space. Artists have a right to the city, just as anyone else does. And that needs to be central to our policies and programs, rather than artists being used as a sticking plaster or some sort of rocket fuel that will help the boom. And what we need to do is build on this. And I think the policy research that's being done, the work on the notion of what the real condition of artists is vital for this. But we need to go further in terms of this and really explore the whole interrelationship between culture and the economy. And increasingly, cities are starting to look in this direction. And I think the development of a number of what are referred to as city mayors for the night, or for the nighttime economy, are often indicative of this taking seriously the diurnal nature of the economy. That the idea is that the city mayors that we have at the moment have only been paying attention to what happens in the day. And if culture and entertainment are what happens at the night, we need to pay attention to that as well. That's the notion. But going in this direction, I think, is really interesting. And a number of cities have started to recognize that infrastructure is vital for the creative economy and for artists. Artists need studios, artists need somewhere to live, etc. So you need to actually build this infrastructure. You also need, as in any industry, you need a whole range of infrastructure, from practice spaces to small performance spaces to large spaces, to those flagship developments that cities love building, new concert halls, but they forget about all the steps that go on between that. We need this whole range of infrastructure, soft infrastructure as well. So that's training infrastructure. So training infrastructure is needed to be put in place. It's all right wanting the flagship development and the international visitors, but you need to grow your own as well. And you need to sustain a local creative infrastructure. And there's a role here, both for the public sector and for the third sector, often in terms of providing the appropriate material space, and also in terms of the training facilities that are needed, as well as the third point, which I think is vital, which is intermediary services. And what I mean here is those that act as brokers between the various self-employed people that actually knit together the system, the ecosystem in real life. Because you have a non-functioning system if it's only made up individual atomistic components. Somebody needs to articulate it together, and that used to be large organizations, but all of that, the state has withdrawn for a lot from public funding of the arts, and those integrative elements are lost. So definitely we need to create a new culture of cultural intermediaries that will allow us to connect these things together, and also will be the ears that will listen to the state of the artist, to recognize the conditions of artistic production and the difficulties of existing in this field. And finally, I will add that at this stage, we also need to think about sustainability in two ways. Economic sustainability. Artists are assumed to be able to be endlessly flexible and start up and finish very, very quickly. No other sector of the economy bears that burden. It requires an investment in the sustainability of networks that otherwise would fall apart. The extra labor that's involved in behind the scenes needs to be there as a supportive platform that can be and should be invested in. So this issue of sustainability is critical for the sector. That shouldn't be about personal risk, because that's how it is at the moment, is that this is based on personal risk.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much for this. I completely share your vision, and I must say that you are my favorite sociologist between cultural economists, really. You are fantastic. Thank you very much for this. I would like to confront those observations with the historical issues, historical long-term rethinking about the barriers to entry for artists by Karol Borowiecki. Unfortunately, only 8 minutes now. I'm sorry for this, but I would like to have at least some minutes at the end for our discussion.
I will then keep very short, and certainly my contribution will be less wide than Andy's. I just would like to present one small idea, but an important one, related to the barriers to entry for artists. So these barriers to entry, they are unobserved directly, and hence we do not know much about this. And hence also policy is limited on these issues. I'm thinking here about barriers such as, related to discrimination based on gender, race, or perhaps family income. So as we have seen, it is very difficult to obtain a number on artists, how many artists there are. It's even more difficult to obtain a number on would-be artists, so on people who maybe have the talent, maybe have the skills, but they do not become artists because they are hindered by these barriers. And this is costly. This is costly because this pushes our cultural production away from its potential. Just think about, all these big influential artists of the past who kind of overcame these barriers and became artists just by chance, right? I'm thinking here, for example, about Marc Chagall. He was facing, he came from a poor family background. There was this lack of financial resources barrier. His culture and religious barriers added to this, and more or less by chance he became an artist. And just let's just realize how poorer the cultural heritage would be without such important artists. So a very brief contribution from my side, showing you essentially 3 slides, 3 patterns based on a paper that has been recently published using US data. And it is a US focus because the data there is quite unique, quite outstanding, data that enables us to illuminate the very long-term trend, as much as 160 years of art history. And so we can learn something about the patterns, the long-term patterns. So here on the first graph, I'm showing you the female share by occupation over the 160 years. And this is shown for 4 types of artists: visual artists, musicians, literary artists, authors, and performance artists, namely actors. And this is a little bit contrasted here with the solid line. This is a line of non-artists, non-creatives. And we observe that the share of the female begins initially at an extremely low percentage. From the 50s, it is increasing. I guess this is a good trend. It increases in some areas, musicians and authors, a bit above the share of non-creatives, and it is approaching 50%. But I think we should bear in mind that the 50-50 split between female and male does not mean gender equality. Even equal pay doesn't mean gender equality. Gender equality means that independent of the gender, one has the same chances of entering the arts, of becoming an artist. And it could well be the case that there are many more women who want to, for example, pursue the career of a visual artist than male, and hence we would expect a higher share of the female if we had a gender equality. Second, a few words here on racial inequality. So here we see the share of white by occupation, contrasted again with the non-creative occupations. We see that that the shares of non-white increases only very slowly over time. Racial inequalities are very persistent in the US. The discipline of musicians and actors is the most racially diverse area, but it is still less balanced than that of non-creatives. And also here we don't really see what are the wage inequalities and what are the inequalities perhaps in the type of work conducted here, right? I mean, the share of whites and non-whites looks fairly balanced when it comes to actors, for example, but maybe the non-white actors pursue and accept very different roles than the white actors. So another source of inequality, racial inequality, that is not observed in graphs like this one here. And then finally, a word about family income. So it is fairly well known that artists earn little and sometimes even as little as nothing. What is perhaps a bit less established is that artists usually come or often come from wealthier families than non-artists. Using the US data, this can be calculated. So a person from a household with an income higher by $10,000 US is about 8% more likely to become an artist. Not having the access to family wealth, to family income, may hinder, may be a barrier to some people of becoming an artist. And in fact, there is also a very interesting study conducted by the NPR, a media platform, which shows that designers, musicians, and artists, it's a kind of aggregated category, earn as much as 35% less when they are artists and adults in 2010 than what was their family income or household income when they were children in the late 70s. So to conclude, first of all, being an optimist, these very long-term trends that we see move partly in the right direction. They probably move slower than we would like to see these changes, but they seem to be moving in the right direction. More female, more non-whites, and so on become involved in the arts. However, we are still very far away from equality. And these barriers to entry, or in economics, well, jargon, market imperfections, lead to two problems. The first problem, I think, is less important. The first problem is that there are some artists who maybe should not be artists. And the problem here is because the resources devoted towards artists are scarce, they are limited, and they are, in this case, allocated, let's say, to the wrong person. This is a more debatable problem. I don't think it's a very big problem. The bigger problem is the second one here, that some people should be artists, but they are not because of the barriers to entry. And this means that the creative potential of our societies is not fully exploited. This means that the likes of Marc Chagall and many others are perhaps not discovered, not identified.
Karol, thank you very much. This is a very crucial question. Can we go on to Helmut now? Because otherwise we can't have him in this panel. Helmut, the floor is yours. What about the future? Please, go on.
Thank you so much, Dorota. I have exactly 7 minutes left, and if you want to have a discussion, only 5, so I should be very, very brief. And my main argument is that culture and the arts are caught in a very restrictive and unhelpful policy framework in most countries. And there's a complex interaction between institutional deficiencies and deeply ingrained values that are reinforced by an elite structure that oversees, in a way, what we refer to as the creative or cultural economy. Culture is ill-defined in terms of ministries and departments in most countries. So very often nobody is really responsible for the arts. And I think if we look at the future of cultural policy, this would have to change. Not that every country should have a department or a ministry of culture, but we need to find ways in which we can place the concerns of the creative economy much more closely to policymakers. I want to give you one example to show you that it's not only the institutional deficiencies we're addressing, but they're also deeply ingrained value deficiency. I looked up the incoming class of the Bauhaus in 1919, 1920. Now, you can probably agree that the Bauhaus was one of the most innovative and creative collective ventures in the 20th century. But very few people know that there were more women in the incoming class of the Bauhaus than men. And after a few years, that has changed to only a 30% share of women in the incoming class of the Bauhaus. And why? Because people like Van der Rohe and Gropius totally misread the motivations of the women, and they put women into knitting classes, right? And if you look at the funnel that we have lots of women entering art schools and so on, and very few then become professional artists. This kind of funnel where we lose a lot of talent on the way is also seen in the funding patterns of most public agencies. And I would also say most foundations, right? So 90% of all the funding in the city of Berlin here goes to 10 established institutions. Right? And those who would then be freelance artists get the rest of the pie. And when we had a pandemic when COVID came, the city threw a lot of money at the arts and culture, but it followed the same non-innovative pattern than before. So Dorota, looking at the future means that we have to think outside the box a bit, right? We're not going to solve the problems that Emilia and Karol and Mari identified by using the same institutional structure. I think we need policy innovations in a very serious way. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you very much. Fantastic. This is your question, and your statement was just the question I would like to ask to all of you. What would you be our message to the organizers of this conference for the future cultural policies from the perspective of researchers in cultural economics? Marilena.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy, the comments by Helmut, because I'm teaching entrepreneurship and I'm really a supporter of divergent thinking and parallel thinking, because actually we cannot change the society, the state of the art, with the same instruments that have produced these specific outputs. So we need to do really something more innovative, thinking, I would say in a different, for example, in Italy, we have this, if you are in Italy and you don't have a job, but just because you are in Italy and you are Italian, then you're entitled to receive a sort of monthly salary for a short time. But it's, I would say, a fixed income that can provide some sustainability, a sort of minimum wage.
Okay.
Thank
you. So something like out of the box, yes? Something like completely new. Andy. Where is Andy?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I definitely support that idea of which we might call a universal basic income for artists. That sort of notion, I think, is one way of thinking about it. I do think I come back to Helmut's point about there is also a challenge at the institutional level, and I think the end to this silo thinking, where arts and culture is constrained to a little area. I think what we have to develop are new tools of transversal policy making that allows us to connect across areas. But of course, the big challenge will be the legitimacy of the cultural data if we're having to argue with the health service or the education service, for example.
Okay, thank you, Karol. What for future?
Thank you. I think, well, being a kind of research-oriented person, I think that I would like to kind of prescribe more research in order to identify the barriers that are preventing people from becoming artists, kind of provide a list of the barriers, and then in a second step, evaluate these different barriers. It could be related to gender, to nationality, race, and so on. Before the third step, providing some policy prescriptions, but this is certainly a long path, but also an important one.
Thank you, Emilia.
Well, for me, as a young scholar, a young researcher, I think my conclusion is that maybe we should stop reinventing the wheel, because there are so many researches going on around the world. We have so many beautiful people here doing their own research, but actually we don't know about this, and we're constantly reinventing the wheel in our national ground. So I think the flow of the research should be kept better.
Thank you. Of course, the interdisciplinary approach is extremely important, but from my side and from my exercise at the moment, when I'm fighting with a phenomenon which is called hating artists instead of loving them, it is extremely important for us not to think only about the new approach to cultural policies, but also to think about the new approach to new collaboration, because between cultural economists and cultural politicians. Thank you very much. You are fantastic. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Big applause to all of you.